This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Christy. Wonderful to be here in Ocala with you guys tonight. Thank you. I said thank you to Lori, but didn't really mean it. She really has been running me like crazy since I got here, and I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into when I feel like she left a few details out when she ran through this with me. But it has been amazing to be here in Ocala. Getting to go work with the students over at Bellevue yesterday, and then this morning at Osceola. Meeting with young culinary students. I mean, I had nothing like that when I was their age. So the fact that that's happening now here in Ocala, I think is really fantastic. And to I've already met a few of your local chefs who are going to be featured later tonight at this event, which I'm really excited about. I think is really another wonderful thing. And for me in creating the flavor matrix and everything we've done, that's what I want to see happen with the flavor matrix is people get inspired and create their own new things with just information. I want to be able to provide the information and let other people and fuel other people's creativity. Now, I don't know what happened to Martha Jane, oh, there she is. There. Do you want to stand up and wave and say hello? Chef Martha Jane, who prepared all of those lovely bites for you. I was late getting over there, and you guys were hungry, so I didn't even get to taste what she created. But you guys tell me how. Wonderful. I'll take that as a big yes. So thank you for your work. And she was working with one of our pairings. We tried to come up or select some of the more surprising pairings from the flavor matrix, and she drew cauliflower and fig, and was challenged with creating around those two ingredients. And it sounds like you did a wonderful job. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here and lending your talents to the evening. Before we jump into it, just a little quick background about myself. I am currently the Director of Culinary Research at the Institute of Culinary Education up in New York City. There's kind of a long path that brought me up there, but it all goes back and started in Pensacola, Florida, where I moved when I was 5 years old and grew up there. Got my first job working in restaurants when I was 16 years old out at the beach in Pensacola, which was just a job at the time. My parents got me a car when I turned 16, but told me they weren't going to pay for insurance or gas. I had to figure that out on my own. So a family friend was a waiter at this restaurant and said, "Hey, they're looking for a dishwasher. Why don't you come out and apply?" And I was like, "That's something I could do." So at the age of 16, I got a job as a dishwasher and was in high school and was playing football, on my high school football team. I've basically been this size since I was about 14. So, as a freshman, I was the center, and then because I was big enough to be a center as a freshman, and then I just kind of stayed this size. I was never able to get any wider or any taller or anything. So my sophomore year, I was a tackle. And junior year, I was tight end. They just kept moving me further and further out. As everyone else kept getting bigger and bigger, they're like, "Oh, you can't be here. You're not big enough to stick in the middle with these guys anymore." And unfortunately, I was not quite fast enough or sure-handed enough to be a very successful. I was a blocking tight end. We ran a lot of two. If you guys are football people, a lot of two tight end sets, and there was never any threat of me breaking out and for a pass. But so I was playing football at the time and working in a restaurant, and I loved kind of the camaraderie and the culture of the kitchen, and it was very similar to what I experienced in the locker room and on the team with the football team. It was noisy and sweaty and sometimes a little bit dirty, but a lot of fun. The way we all kind of worked together towards a great common goal. And so I fell in love with being in the kitchen, but also swore that there was no way I was going to spend the rest of my life in this kind of sweaty and kind of dirty place. Like, no way am I going to be a chef. So I went off to school and started studying sports medicine. I was in Birmingham, Alabama at the time, at Stanford University, and every summer I would still go back to the restaurant. After my second summer back in Pensacola, working at the restaurant again, I was just, this is what I really would need to be doing. So I went back up to Birmingham and started, I wanted to start asking friends, what's the best restaurant in Birmingham? They told me, and I went and knocked on the back door of that kitchen and said, I want to work here. And they're like, well, you can't work here, but we have another restaurant, you can work at that one. So I was like, okay, I'll take it. I'll be back here soon. And that's exactly what happened. I started working for a chef named Frank Stitt, who has 4 amazing restaurants in Birmingham, and I began at his most casual restaurant and worked my way up to eventually be the head chef of the flagship restaurant, which at the time was ranked as the number 5 restaurant in the nation by Gourmet Magazine, and Frank Stitt, our owner, had just won the James Beard Award as the best chef in the Southeast. So it was a good time, and it afforded me some incredible opportunities to travel to New York, to cook at the James Beard House, and be a featured chef there, and also collaborate with some amazing chefs in New York like Danielle Boulud, who I eventually worked for at his restaurant Danielle in New York City, before I moved over to ICE and started just as an instructor, but eventually kind of created this role of Director of Culinary Research for myself, because I loved teaching and I loved being in the classroom, but I also missed the development and innovation that I was used to as being a chef and writing menus and creating new dishes. So teaching is wonderful, but sometimes that innovation part of it lacks. So I lobbied for a long time, in the mid 2000s or mid to 2000s. To start teaching things like sous vide at ICE, which was kind of a little known technique at the time and was only in kind of these very high level restaurants. But I believe that it was something people were going to start experiencing more and more, and our students were going to see when they got out in the kitchens. And I wanted them to know what this was and how to at least be familiar with the equipment. So that's a program we started, and then it was really kind of around everything around modern cuisine. I was able to develop at ICE. Part of my transition to ICE, that I was beginning to work on cookbooks and be involved with a few TV projects. I was working actually on the pilot for Chopped. If any of you guys are Food Network fans, I think you probably know the show Chopped. But there were 2 pilots for Chopped. The first one didn't go so well, and that's a different story for another time, because we could spend the whole night talking about how bad that first pilot was. But you'll have to just trust me on that. And I still hope that there will at one point be a screening of that original pilot, because it was so wonderfully awful. So there was a second pilot which also never aired, and then finally I got to compete on the show in season 1, and I won, and then went on to the Champions Tournament in season 2, which I also won. So that was an incredible opportunity for me and sort of my entree into being on TV and cooking on TV. Which was great. But also, it's I've always enjoyed kind of puzzles and problem solving, and that was a big part of Chopped is it's problem solving, and it's a puzzle. When you open that basket, you have to figure out what to do with it. And my brain, I think, is just kind of wired the right way to often do that successfully. And so when I was working at ICE, and researchers from IBM, ICE, the Institute of Culinary Education, it's a dangerous acronym to throw around these days for a lot of different reasons. Also, I'm trying to reference something, and I have to very well enunciate that ICE is doing this, and not, if you say those two quickly back to back, you know what I'm in the danger of being accidentally affiliated with. So when I was working at ICE with IBM, they came with this idea that Watson had conquered answering questions. Watson could answer any question you could ever throw at it. But they wanted to see if Watson could help people become more creative. And so they wanted to take the approach of Watson assisting with the arts, and they kind of sorted through some ideas and felt like visual or music were a little too objective. And they wanted something a little bit more tangible, so they decided to go with the culinary arts and see if Watson could help a chef in the kitchen. And so they came to us at ICE with this idea, and we sat down and we kind of talked about creative process and how, as a chef, you think about cooking and creating and developing. And the way I kind of talked to them about my process was very similar with what they were trying to do with Watson. So I got the opportunity to work with the team at IBM and develop Watson. And when we began this project, I was incredibly skeptical. There was no way a computer doesn't have hands, doesn't have a tongue, doesn't know anything about cooking, could possibly know more about cooking food than me, who's been doing it professionally for 15 years. But I was like, yeah, let's give this a shot. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to prove this thing wrong because I know more, certainly. But from day one, getting into the kitchen with Watson, when I started to see the way it made decisions about ingredients and combinations and how it put ingredients together, it was something that I had never imagined before, that I'd never seen before, or thought about an approach that way. And it was able to reveal these kind of secret combinations, these secret threads that tied ingredients together, that created these connections, that allowed us to explore flavor in a whole new way. And that's really where this whole project began, with a food truck. We developed the Chef Watson food truck that we took to Las Vegas and to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest. And we actually used Watson, once we kind of worked through the system with the team, we actually used Watson to help us create recipes. And I'll kind of talk to you a little bit more about how we went about creating those recipes and what that really meant. But Watson truly was a tool for inspiration. It gave us ingredients and nothing more. No measurements, no steps, no idea of how to use those ingredients. Just for the dish you're trying to create, these are the ingredients you're going to need. And if you do it right, they'll taste good. And that was it. That was all we got. So we had to go from there. But that also, that if you do it right, forced me to kind of relearn my approach to cooking and creativity. Because first of all, I'm used to saying, okay, it's springtime, asparagus, tarragon, eggs. These are the peas, these are the things that I know go well with asparagus. But instead, Watson was giving me asparagus, Gruyere cheese, pig's feet, mustard, spinach. Well, those don't go together. But I'm not using any of my mental energy here, trying to make decisions about which ingredients to use. I know what ingredients I'm using. Now I just got to figure out how the heck to do it. So, what are the different ways I can use a pig's foot? What are the different forms mustard can take? What is mustard? What does it give me? It gives me spice and vinegar and a little bit of fat. Right? So I started to learn to think about ingredients those way and break them down to their components. And it forced me to kind of relearn the whole process of what happens when you take a bite of food. How many of you guys know what happens when you take a bite of food? Timid. You didn't fall for my trap. I was going to admonish all of you and tell you to put your hands down because I don't believe that you do. But let's take a look at it. So first of all, in this whole conversation, we have to separate taste and flavor, because they are two different things, and we kind of mix those words up a lot. This is what we talked about with the middle school class today, and I looked around the room, and I was happy to not see this anywhere in their room, because this is just a big fat lie. This is just massively oversimplified and not really the way it works. First of all, that's showing us, 4 different tastes. We're up to 6 now. So we're missing 2 complete tastes. And it's a okay idea that there's kind of a higher concentration of those particular taste buds in those spots, but the reality is you can taste sweet anywhere on your tongue. The sweet receptors exist everywhere. They're a little more concentrated at the tip of the tongue. Same with salty. These exist everywhere. And we also don't have umami or fat on there. So these are, 2 tastes that, until 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even recognize. We didn't list them as taste. Umami is rich is a rich, savory flavor. It comes from glutamic acid, which is an amino acid that's found naturally in mushrooms and tomatoes and Parmesan cheese and soy sauce. And it's kind of been a cornerstone of Asian cooking for, they discovered umami. Umami was discovered in 1905. If Google search trends are any kind of indication of when it entered our collective consciousness, we were about 100 years late on it. It was about 2006 that umami started to become a commonly used word in America. And we also sense fat on the tongue, and that's not just like, oh, I took a bite of something rich and fatty and I can feel how that fat coats my tongue. That our tongue actually has receptors that respond to free fatty acids in food and recognize that fat is there. And all of this makes a lot of sense because identifying these 6 things, and probably a few more that we're still yet to discover, is the tongue's sole job. It's kind of a gatekeeper or a nutrient and toxin detector to bring in the good stuff and keep out the bad stuff. You guys have ever been to either side and got smacked in the face with a wave at the ocean, and you get that mouthful of seawater that's really, really salty, and you start to cough and gag and your body's trying to spit it out. Your tongue instantly recognizes that that's too much salt for my system to handle, and I shouldn't swallow it. So immediately your brain clicks over and says, get rid of that, don't swallow it. When we taste things that are extremely sour, extremely bitter, that make us pucker up and make us not want to swallow it, acid and bitterness are typically indicators of spoilage in food or toxins. So our bodies, is reacting and saying, whoa, let's be careful with this. I'm not sure we should be eating this. Sugar is an easy thing for your body to use for energy. So immediately your brain goes, I like this. Bring it on, give me more, right? And when we take a bite of a ripe apple, or really anything crispy, it's an automatic signal to our brain that this is fresh and nutritious and something that's good for us. And so we're drawn to those types of foods. Umami is an amino acid. It's protein. It's something that our body needs, right? And as well as fat. So all of these things that our tongue sense, they kind of let us know what's the good stuff and what's the potentially dangerous stuff. And that's kind of the tongue's only job. It's really the tongue's only job. When we take a bite of food, almost everything what we perceive as flavor comes from the smells in the food. It comes from aroma. And you guys know that when you come home and somebody bakes some chocolate chip cookies, or you walk into that bakery and you get that blast of bread, you're already sensing the flavor of that bread, and you're reacting to it just by the smell that's in the air, by these volatile compounds, these chemical compounds that are present in all foods that tell us about the flavor. Tomorrow morning when you guys get up and you're having your coffee, do this. It tastes like hot, bitter water, or unless you had a bunch of sugar in it, it tastes like hot, sweet water. But that's all you're going to sense because, coffee is all aroma. There's about 850 different chemical compounds in a cup of coffee that combine to create the flavor of that coffee. It's one of the most complex substances in the world. So we're smelling it immediately through our nose before it even enters our mouth. And then as you bite and chew, you start to break up the food and release more and more of these molecules that filter up through the back of the through the back of the throat and back into the nose. And so you can continue savoring a flavor. You think about sipping a wine, and you can kind of linger on that flavor. As long as those molecules remain in your mouth, you can perceive the flavor and the aroma in there. So actually 80% of what we perceive when we take a bite of food comes from the tongue. And comes from the nose. The tongue only accounts for 20% of what we're perceiving. Really, remember, it's only really reporting about those 6 things. And there's actually a couple other sensations that come from the mouth, but they're not actually taste. They're more nerve responses that happen in the mouth. All right, so if we look at the comparison, You've got your classic 6 tastes, and then spicy, astringent, metallic. Those are 3 other things that can be sensed by the tongue, but they're more nerve reactions than they are actually taste. There's not a sensor that detects that. It's I can sense spicy through my cuticles or my eyeballs or any other part of my body that after I finish chopping jalapenos that I accidentally touch without washing my hands really well. It's a mistake you often make just once. Okay. Though with that, so you guys, with spicy food, that all comes from a chemical compound called capsaicin, which is odorless and therefore flavorless. So it only provides spiciness. It reacts to nerves, really, rather than reacting to a specific spot on your tongue. But that substance, capsaicin, is fat soluble. Okay, it's hydrophobic, meaning that you eat something really spicy and chug a bunch of ice water, as long as that cold sensation is on your tongue, you feel better, but as soon as that cold sensation goes away, it gets hot again because that water does not wash away capsaicin. It sticks. If you chug some blue cheese dressing, those fat molecules in the blue cheese dressing are going to bind that capsaicin and wash it away, and you're going to feel relief. Or drink a glass of milk, or do something else. But so fat is the way to deal with spiciness, and it's going to alleviate that spice. Okay, but if we look at that, and then this is a coffee tasting wheel to identify all the different potential aromas in a cup of coffee. And this is something that serious coffee people use, but we see similar ones for wines and beers. All of these aromas exist in wine and coffee and beer, and we often study them and talk about them in this way, but for some reason, never really so much in food, even though, again, 80% of what happens when we take a bite of food comes from this side of it, right? And we don't think about that quite as much. But before we can really think about that too much, to kind of understand a little bit more about the aromas and flavor in food and where it comes from, it's these guys. It's all of these, 10. I never was able to find an actual number of the amount of volatile compounds that exist that are found in food. It's well into the thousands, if not tens of thousands, but I never found a final number. Mesofurane is a fairly common one, and all of these compounds come down to something like this that could be any random clip art out of a high school chemistry book, right? They're basically meaningless to me. I'm a chef. I am not a scientist. But if we were able to get a little vial of mesofurane in solution and open it up and smell it. Oh, that's fancy, right? Oops, there we go. It smells like this. It smells buttery and toasted. It smells like fresh baked croissant. It has this wonderful buttery toasted aroma. But the interesting thing about these compounds and how they work, so of course we're going to find mesofurane in any baked bread, almost in any baked pastry. We're going to find good concentrations of mesofurane. But mesofurane is one of the top 3 components in creating the flavor. Anybody want to guess? Proud Florida product. Strawberries. So there are about 350 different compounds in the strawberry that create its flavor. Only a couple of them actually smell like strawberries. The rest smell like croissants and suntan lotion and dead fish and all kinds of other things. But it's that combination of those 350 different compounds together that creates that unique aroma of the strawberry and makes it different than the blueberry and makes it different than the cranberry, okay? There's a lot of apple aromas actually in a strawberry as well, and they make for some really great pairings. So, that idea, and I love to kind of liken it to, the idea of a pixel in a photograph. And when we zoom in on a photo, have a photo of outer space, and if you get in close enough, there's going to be a lot of just little pink dots. Pink dots have nothing to do with a picture of outer space, but they're there and they make up a big part of it. And if we went in and took all of those pink dots away, the picture would look a little weird. It wouldn't look quite right. The stars wouldn't have the same kind of shine because we took away all those little pink dots. And that's the way all of these myriad of different compounds in food work. They're not something that we necessarily perceive when we take a bite of a strawberry, but if we took them away, we would notice something was really majorly different and wrong with it. So this is all a really new idea and new science for us as chefs to be understanding and studying. And the whole concept of understanding chemical compounds in this way and what they do for flavor and how we can use them to be more creative started in a really weird place over in England. An amazing chef named Heston Blumenthal, who has the Fat Duck in England. One day they have a dedicated research and development kitchen, and they were doing some experimentation with sweet and salty ingredients. They were tasting all kinds of different sweet and salty things together to see, what new and different and weird might work. And they stumbled on this: caviar and white chocolate. Right, exactly. But as the team all tried that, they were blown away by how great it was. And they all kind of looked at each other and they're like, well, why the hell does this work? It clearly should not. And they're like, I don't know. What, you haven't? No? Nobody knew. So they went to some flavor scientists and said, explain this to us. And they ran gas chromatography profiles of the chemical compounds in each of those ingredients and found that they shared some specific high concentrations of a few different compounds, and said, well, they kind of link up because of these few things, and maybe that's why. And so that kind of began this whole idea that if we can look at ingredients by their components rather than just the flavors that we can perceive with the naked eye or the naked nose, as it were, we can start to find these new connections between ingredients that we may have never found before or never really knew existed before. And just to prove it's not just an anomaly between these two, we can use the same science to understand some of our favorite combinations. Like 4-methylpentanoic acid. Everybody's favorite, right? How many of you guys love this? Christy in the back, she does. I'm building a new restaurant in Pensacola based on 4-methylpentanoic acid. What it's all about. It has wonderful floral aroma, and it's found in tomatoes and dairy products and baked wheat. It's part of the chemical basic of a margarita pizza. Tomatoes, dairy products, and baked wheat all share 4-methylpentanoic acid in fairly high concentrations. It's nowhere near being the only thing that makes pizza great, but it's a little part of what makes it so delicious. And there's more, like isopentanol. What? Like isopentanol. It has a very complex aroma that kind of ranges from almond to cocoa, and we say cooked vegetable. That's kind of a weird aroma to think about, but think sort of like boiled potatoes, as well as a little bit of kind of malty and spice. So it's fairly complex, but this is a slide I put together only when I come down around this area. It's in a number of our favorite things, right? Because we're out doing pizza here. Chocolate, pecans, and bourbon all have isopentanol in them, which makes for a pretty good combination, I think, as we all know. So we spent a lot of time, I've spent a lot of time understanding these combinations, both in working with Chef Watson and on my own to create the flavor matrix, which we're going to talk a bit about. But so understanding these chemical compounds and seeing how these combinations work really did enable us to be more creative. And there were a lot of naysayers in the beginning, and myself included. But a lot of people who said, you're not being more creative. A computer is telling you what to make. And this was the first cookbook that we created with recipes exclusively, ingredients for recipes exclusively selected by Chef Watson. And we created 60 different recipes on there. But again, a lot of people and kind of old school chefs were like, oh, the computer's telling you what to make. You're not being creative at all. But the way I explained it to students, both at Bellevue and this morning at Osceola was, really having constraints and being limited to just those ingredients, like we were talking about before, really force you to think more about those ingredients and the different ways you could use them. And I think there's this great quote from T.S. Eliot, that kind of enforces that idea that when we're first forced to work within a strict framework, the imagination is taxed to the utmost because it's no longer being distracted by, what if I add this? What if I add this? What if I use this ingredient too? No, I'm stuck within this framework and I have to use those. So, given kind of the freedom of those restrictions, we have this incredible opportunity to really be more creative. And we did some really great examples, I think, of that in the book. When we would ask Watson to help us create a recipe, we would give it 3 directives: a style of cuisine to select ingredients from, a style of dish. We tried to always keep that as open-ended as possible, so to allow for more creativity, and then a single ingredient to pair other ingredients to. So this is the example of the Italian roast duck. And Watson told us that if we wanted to make a roast duck dish, first of all, Watson knew through reading thousands of pages of text the ingredients that are common to Italian cooking. It also knew that a roast protein dish typically included a number of spices, different seasonings and vegetables, and all of these things that would go into a recipe for different types of roast. And then it started with duck and started pairing on a molecular basis ingredients to duck. So we wound up with duck with basil, ginger, tomato, fennel, mushroom, apple, sage, cherry, cinnamon, and black pepper. That was what we were stuck with to create a new dish with duck. So myself and another chef took those ingredients and went to different sides of the kitchen and made our own versions of this dish. And this was kind of our thumbs up to the naysayers. Not actually a thumb, it was a different finger, but we'll stick with the thumb for now. To kind of illustrate, how personal, this still was and how, you could be creative. So these are the 2 dishes that we wound up, These are the 2 dishes that we wound up creating with those ingredients. One with, apples kind of as a large feature, along with a sausage made from the duck, ground up with the cherries and the fennel inside. And then those sausages braised in a porcini tomato sauce with kind of a condiment of cherries and olives that were cooked down with sage and red wine and spread on the side. And then, over here was kind of a little more classic looking with a pan roast breast with a little salad of celery or fennel and olive on top, and roast mushrooms, and then a jus made from the tomato. So and there's actually a little bit of duck confit scattered in there as well. So 2 chefs with the exact same ingredients and the exact same directive to create something came back with very, very different results. So, again, I just felt like this was just a fantastic illustration of how, the creativity really can sprawl when we approach cooking in this way. We found a lot of, that's an interesting dish, and it's got some surprise elements to it, but it's not the most surprising. There's a lot of familiar Italian ingredients there. Watson helped reveal it, and just studying ingredients in this way really helped to reveal some very surprising combinations. Like this one. gamma-dodecalactone, which is in this class of aromatics called lactones. These are the things that create those kind of typically tropical or fruity smells. If you think about a frozen coconut drink you would have at the beach, or your suntan lotion. Those kind of things are loaded with lactones that create that tropical aroma. They're also found in chicken, mushrooms, and strawberries, and fairly high concentration of all three. And again, kind of underneath the surface of each of those, they're a little bit latent. They're not something that just pops out that you would normally smell on your own. This was part of a set of ingredients we were tasked with creating. And I took these ingredients and turned them into, I think, one of my favorite recipes in my new book, The Flavor Matrix, which was a chicken and mushroom burger with strawberry ketchup. So it's, again, right, that's, if I on a random day opened my refrigerator and saw chicken and mushrooms and strawberries inside of my refrigerator, honey, we're going out to eat tonight. Closing the door, there's no way we can do anything with this. But when I have to just sit and stare at those ingredients and I've got to do something with them, we start to find ways to get creative, and the more I kind of stared at a strawberry, the more I realized it's a lot like a tomato. Like, it smells prettier, but it's fruit structure, water, a whole lot of it, sugar acid balance. It's just a little more perfumey. A strawberry is just a tomato with perfume. Okay? I can work with this. What do I love to make with tomatoes? Ketchup. Here we go. I've already got mushrooms. Those can add a savory edge to my strawberry. So we created this as basically a puree of fresh strawberries cooked down with mushrooms and ginger and shallots and garlic. So it has a nice spice, and it has this nice kind of savory sweet balance, because ketchup's a little bit sweet too. And that earthiness really kind of mutes the perfume of the strawberry and makes for a beautiful combination. This is actually that's just a pretty dish, right? We like it. This was a project we were doing with food waste, where we wanted to find ways to utilize commonly wasted ingredients. And actually the main feature of this dish, it's quite a small little plating, but those little charred bits all around are celery. And I thought about what's one of the most commonly wasted ingredients in my kitchen, and celery is certainly it. So we wanted to find some ways to make celery sort of exciting and different. And so this was celery that wound up marinated in coconut milk with a little bit of chili sauce and shrimp paste, and then grilled. And it made it absolutely delicious. But it was, again, being able to sort of find those combinations. So all of that work, in total, led me to the creation of the Flavor Matrix, which just came out a month ago today, a couple days ago. But anyway, about a month. It's a month old, and this is the book that kind of unwinds all of this science that we've been talking about and explains it. So, we looked earlier at those pairing wheels, looking at one that explains taste and one that explains flavor. So we actually took those wheels and adapted them to ingredients. So I set about doing the work and the research of creating 58 different matrices based on those flavor pairing wheels, but actually through the research creating data points for aroma categories in every single one of these. And so in this, figure out which way this thing points. Oh, all right. So we have the ingredients around the outside that match well with the central ingredient. In this case, this is the vanilla matrix. So you're going to see a lot of the common ingredients that we know go well with vanilla. No surprises on there. But also just kind of the first glance gives you an idea of the flavor profile of vanilla. There's a lot of strong fruity aromas and a lot of strong roasted aromas. This category here is Maillard, or what happens in the Maillard reaction when proteins and sugars start to brown and break down. It's the smell of baking bread. It's the smell of grilling meat. It's something that we're kind of intrinsically drawn to that makes your mouth water. But those are the two biggest categories. So right away we know anything with those flavors is going to be a good match for vanilla, right? And so this is about, again, finding that creativity and breaking away from, okay, vanilla goes in my dessert. We see here, nectarine and peach are a particularly strong match. So the further an ingredient sticks out, the more it has in common with the central ingredient. All of these little bars here are from this line out are measurements of 10 coming out. So if we go down, that's 190, 80, 70. So these have, nectarine and peach there have about 65% of their chemical compounds in common with vanilla. So remember that in a few months when the peaches and nectarines start rolling in. Anytime you're using them, vanilla is going to be a really incredible match with them. And we see down here, we want to start to think about more ingredients that go well. Coffee, brown butter, and whiskey, bourbon, are also really good matches. Right, so now we can start kind of piecing together some of our best matches here. Coming around also on vanilla, yogurt and milk and cream, right? So we see some classic desserts developing there. A little peach with some vanilla, roasted, a little bit of bourbon, a little vanilla ice cream. We've got some good stuff developing, and that's and there's no surprise there. But for me, when I study a matrix like this, I want to think about what is the surprise? What do I see on there that I don't think of with vanilla? And we start looking in the vegetables over here, and you see corn and tomatoes and potatoes and oats and mushrooms, and these are all good matches for vanilla. And what I really wanted to do with the flavor matrix, again, it wasn't for me about creating this great book of recipes and here, go cook this and do it and make exactly what I say. And I'm such an amazing chef. Look at me. Here's some really interesting information that I think is super interesting. And here, I wanted to give with the flavor matrix some exciting ways to use that information. So our recipe in the flavor matrix for the vanilla chapter is actually just a savory vanilla butter. So it's, you go to any great steakhouse and they have that like herby butter that they put on top of your steak after it comes off of the grill. Well, we took that same idea and incorporated vanilla into it. And it makes the most amazing condiment and finish for grilled and roasted vegetables. So it's a really easy way to kind of spice up your vegetables, to add a whole lot more flavor to them without much effort. And if we just use a small amount of this butter, it can actually be a really helpful way to do this. In fact, I just a few weeks ago ate corn on the cob with vanilla butter with Dr. Oz on his show, and showed him how to make it and showed him a few of the other recipes from the flavor matrix. It's going to air next April 20th, whenever that is. So if you guys are Dr. Oz fans, keep an eye out. Both my wife and I were on there. She made strawberry ketchup with him, and we served it with roasted parsnips. That's just like a little sauce for roasted parsnips, and fed it to the audience, and they really enjoyed it. But we were kind of really with him talking about how so often in cooking, fat and sugar, sort of become this crutch to make things taste good. I grew up cooking in French restaurants, so that idea of add some more butter is definitely part of what I know and what I love, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we can't eat that every day. So if we can, study and be more thoughtful about ingredients and how we use them and find some of these exciting combinations, we can make our regular old grilled and roasted vegetables more delicious and more exciting. And so that's one of the things we hope to do with the flavor. It's actually pretty good timing. So we're winding up. But one of the things we hope we can do with the flavor matrix. So that actually does kind of wind up my talk for you guys. Happy to take questions for a little bit here while we can. Do we have an official method or process for that? Lori's going to, my lovely assistant. Hey, look, now you're going to be running around. It's about time. Okay.
Well, actually, it's not really happening. I forgot. Christy is going to be your lovely assistant, and Jose. Okay.
All
but
right.
I was remiss in earlier to let you all know that the Flavor Matrix, James' book, is currently at Shannon Roth Collection, and it will be there for. We will not send back. They will be there for the next, say, 10 days. So anybody who would like to get, I know that Shannon also has a few copies there that are signed. So I encourage you all to go to Shannon's and pick up a copy of the Flavor Matrix.
Or two.
It's a beautiful, or three.
Four,
and also
five.
to let you know that when you do buy your copy from Shannon's, that the proceeds from the books go to the cause that we're supporting tonight. So please support that. And I'm turning the mic over to Christy now because I'm running down to our next event, which I hope some of you will be following me down there. And I know some of you are, and I hope others do as well. Thank you all, and we'll see you on May 16th for Dr. William Davis. Thanks.
Thank you, Lori.
We were so excited about that announcement. I think let's maybe do one more round to thank our speaker tonight. We do have several minutes for questions. So if you raise your hand, please. James, you get to call on who you would like to speak.
All right. Well, I got the first one back there.
We have our first victim in the back.
Uh-oh. If we can get to him.
Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi there. Did the computer recommend any combinations that you just couldn't get to work?
No, and I don't know if that was my own stunning abilities or that Watson was really that great at doing this. We really never did come out with anything that didn't work. There were a few things that we sort of abandoned just because after working on them for a while, we just found them not that interesting or not that surprising, and we're like, yeah, that's One we did a Midwestern mushroom stroganoff. Because we were trying to make the weirdest stuff we could to really get people interested and excited. And it worked out fine, but it was, Midwestern was not a really distinctive region to pull ingredients from. So basically, there was no way it wouldn't just be kind of a casserole anyway with fairly normal ingredients. And there were a few others like that. So there are some things we kind of abandoned, but never because it didn't work. One of the strangest ones that we had with Chef Watson was a pork belly moussaka that had green peas, red bell peppers, dill, and cottage cheese, along with pork belly in it. And we got that one to be, it's one of my favorite dishes that we made. It's absolutely delicious. We slow cooked the pork belly and sliced it thin and let it kind of stand in the moussaka in place of the eggplant slices in the moussaka, and then made kind of a rich bechamel with the cottage cheese, and then sautéed, did a nice vegetable layer with little chunks of pork belly. And the peas and red peppers and dill, and it was absolutely fantastic. So there were tons of surprises, certainly that came out. But yeah, there was never anything that just was awful and we couldn't figure out a way around it. We definitely took some liberties in that, but we always did. Right up front here. And if you want, you can tell me and I'll repeat, or you can.
They can manage.
All right.
So we'd like to keep it on the mic for the.
I was going to repeat it for that. That's okay.
Do you ever work with Alton Brown? He had a wonderful series that cleverly talked about chemistry and food.
Yes, I've had some great opportunities to do a whole lot on Food Network and meet most of my favorite people, but Alton is not one that I've had the chance. I'm hoping at some point now, that the flavor matrix is out, that we'll get a chance to kind of connect and talk about it. I love his show. I mean, for me as a young cook, I watch that show all the time because I was, so interested in kind of the understanding the why of cooking, and he really did a great job of it. Still does, obviously. One in the back?
Back
All right.
here? Yep.
Yes. Do you have any suggestions on how to utilize turmeric with ginger in sauces, whatever, to enhance flavor? Because those are two ingredients I try to use a lot.
Yes.
Turmeric and ginger are anti-inflammatory, so
Right, absolutely. And it is something we use a lot, and that's one of the things I love, about the flavor matrix as well. We don't have a turmeric. I believe we do have a ginger flavor matrix, and when you start to understand so many similarities between ingredients, you can kind of look at what pairs well with ginger, and almost everything that pairs well with ginger is also going to pair well with turmeric. But in particular, citrus flavors work really well. And when we talk about citrus flavors, I always like to kind of try to think beyond oranges, lemons, limes, and grapefruits, but think about things that have citrus flavor. So, other spices like Szechuan peppercorns and coriander and lemongrass are all really great matches. And then from there as well, you go to the things that pair well with them. So, a lot of this problem solving in cooking and finding how to combine ingredients becomes sort of that classic, A is equal to B, B is equal to C, therefore A must be equal to C. So sometimes when we find the things that connect with that first pairing, and then we meet that next ingredient, sometimes we can slip that middle piece out of the way and bring the two together. I really love, we make a turmeric and coconut sambal, which is just fresh grated coconut, or you can use dry and unsweetened coconut with lime juice, mint, and lots of turmeric. Toss that together, and then use that as kind of as a finishing condiment for lots of grilled meats and cooked vegetables. So you could grill your vegetables or grill your steak, and then just sprinkle that over it. It's kind of a traditionally way it's used in Southeast Asia. But it's really a wonderful flavor. We do it with a pork taco in the flavor matrix.
All food is not created equal. A tomato from Italy is very different from a tomato grown hydroponically or grown organically. How would you describe a baseline for any ingredient when it's all over the place on the planet?
Yeah, so it's definitely a challenge, and it's like part of the reason that a lot of this data that we use here doesn't exist for wine, because it changes every year. But it does force you to work in some generalities. And we can kind of identify the compounds that are commonly found in tomatoes. And then how and when the tomato was grown is really going to affect the concentration of a number of those things. And often it's, we're talking about flavor and you talk about the taste of something, so it becomes, the easy part often with the tomato is fixing that, acid and sugar balance. Those are easy things, I think, to fix in a tomato. You slice into its tomato and it's just, it's average, right? But when we think about, the taste of the tomato, it's sugar, acid, and umami. Those are the things that we're looking for, in it. So I can kind of understand that, take that information and fix my tomato pretty quickly by whisking together a little pinch of sugar, a little bit of red wine vinegar, and a little bit of soy sauce, and letting those tomatoes soak in there. So there I'm adding the umami, I'm adding the acid, and I'm adding the sugar to that tomato and improving its flavor. So, it's always going to be different, and different times of year they're going to taste different. But we start to kind of understand the flavor and then how the taste is constructed, and then it allows us to play and be a little more flexible with it.
What have you done to transfer this theory so that kids in schools, institutions will eat healthy food that's more flavorful and not dump it in the garbage and go for cheese curds and that sort of thing?
So the question was, what have we done to or what work, if any, has been done to sort of transfer these ideas to doing things like improving school food or making foods that are more exciting for kids. I can tell you at home, I've got my kids a little more interested in their vegetables. My kids are pretty good eaters, on their own. But I think, this is a new field, and that we're sort of just getting into. And I think that really is some great potential with it to make foods that were maybe traditionally unappealing, more appealing, especially with, for kids and school lunches. And again, you talk about working within restrictions and with confinements. School lunch is one of those places where you often have a lot of confinements about just what ingredients and what seasonings are available. So I think, we could definitely, in New York, we work with, we do a lot of work with we have what's called Wellness in the Schools program, where we teach kids, not only the kids about cooking, but also work with a lot of the school workers to find ways to incorporate more fresh produce and more fresh vegetables into their cooking. So, sometimes just a little kind of novel hook like this can be enough, for this, a strawberry sauce for your, roasted veggies, or whatever it may be. So, it's definitely new, but I hope it's something we can kind of, expand and expound upon.
We have time for just 2 more questions, and please do wait for the microphone. I think we're going to go to the back. And then
Go ahead, sir.
So I'm wondering if after 8 hours in the kitchen getting your mind around pork belly and cottage cheese and peas, do you ever just at the end of the day turn Watson loose on cocktails and beverages?
Yes. Yes, we have. We have a number of cocktails. There were a number of cocktails in the Watson cookbook, and we have a number of cocktail ideas in the flavor matrix as well. And that's one group that I've heard a lot from since the release of the book is bartenders and mixologists who are having a lot of fun with the flavor matrix and using it to kind of move into new territory with their cocktails and with what they're creating. So yeah, no, we absolutely have. And I've enjoyed all of it. Last one. All right.
Your flavor wheels, is that at a particular temperature? Because flavor is very temperature critical.
Yes.
And what temperatures and how are the temperatures changing the unmasking of the particular flavor or combination with other flavors?
So, again, these are all sort of the baseline readings, right? So these are the aromas and the flavors that exist in food. At high temperatures, they're going to increase. They're going to become more fragrant. At low temperature, they're going to be a little bit more depressed. And then, when you grill a piece of corn, the flavor is going to change as well as you start to develop those Maillard reactions on the exterior, and you get that smokiness and that char. So that's again kind of where we had to really come back to being a bit more general with this and kind of look at the generalities of what's in a typical ear of corn when you pick it up at your farmer's market. Otherwise, each ingredient would turn into its own volume, of a book, and we, look at it under different cooking techniques and different temperatures and all that. So, it is, but I think it's, it's a great point and kind of an important part of the conversation is that, that's your baseline of flavor, but how can we enhance that just with our cooking technique? If we put it on the grill versus if we boil it versus if we, roast it in a pan with, with ginger, what are we going to do to change that product? So that's, it becomes part of the conversation.
Thank you so much.